today. This isn't a moonshot, is it? This is a long shot.
A moonshot, by its very definition, is something which is very difficult to achieve.
As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through the waves of radiation. Sensors aboard will record radiation levels for scientists to study. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space.
But that we think is worthwhile. And you're right, you know, to be completely level with you, there have been things during this coronavirus. There's no manual for tackling a global pandemic.
There's no manual for tackling a global pandemic.
There's no manual for tackling a global pandemic. There's no manual for tackling a global pandemic.
I think the public has to know this is one of the worst case scenarios in terms of an infectious disease outbreak, in that their cooperation is sought. If there are people who are non-compliant, there are definitely laws and public health powers that can quarantine people in mandatory settings. It's potential you could track people, put bracelets on their arms, have police and other setups to ensure quarantine is undertaken. It is better to be preemptive and precautionary and take the heat of people thinking you might be overreactionary, get ahead of the curve, and then think about whether you've overreacted later. But it's such a serious situation that I think decisive early action is the key.
Police checkpoints are set up on all the bridges, and everyone leaving the city is required to show proof of vaccination. Those who refuse to cooperate are taken away to temporary detention centers.
There's no manual for tackling a global pandemic.
I don't think anybody would have imagined that one of those airliners would have hit the building like that. Nobody in their right mind would have thought that would happen.
There's no manual for tackling a global pandemic.
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
There's no manual for tackling a global pandemic.
I don't think anybody could have predicted that these people would take an airplane and slam it into the World Trade Center, take another one and slam it into the Pentagon.
There's no manual for tackling a global pandemic. There's no manual for tackling a global pandemic.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago. A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Gradually, farmers started getting sick. Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia. The sickest required intensive care. Many died. Experts agree unless it is quickly controlled, it could lead to a severe pandemic.
Today we were running an exercise for a company, bearing in mind I'm now in the private sector, and we sat everybody down in the city, 1,000 people involved in the whole organisation, but the crisis team, and the most peculiar thing was we based our scenario on the simultaneous attacks on the underground and mainline station. So we had to suddenly switch an exercise from fictional to real. And one of the first things is, get that bureau number. When you have a list of people missing, tell them. And it took a long time.
Just to get this right, you were actually working today on an exercise that envisioned virtually this scenario?
Almost precisely.
There's no manual for tackling a global pandemic.
You know, we'll have to prepare for the next one. That, you know, I'd say is will get attention this time.
Do you believe me?
In the Stasi, we had a basic principle. Ask enough questions and the man who is lying will eventually change his story, but the man who tells the truth cannot change his, however unlikely his story sounds.
Do you believe me?